The year is 1807. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, stands at the peak of his power. He has just signed the Treaties of Tilsit, effectively making him the master of much of continental Europe. Kings and emperors bow to his will, and his influence seems boundless. He is an icon of authority. His military genius had redrawn the map, establishing a new order across the land with him at its center. To celebrate this monumental achievement, Napoleon desired a grand event, something befitting his status as a triumphant leader. He wanted a day of leisure and sport, a brief respite from the pressures of governing an entire empire. The task of organizing this celebration fell to his trusted chief of staff, a man named Alexandre Berthier. Berthier, ever eager to please his emperor, immediately began planning an extravagant affair for the ages. He considered many options, from grand feasts to elaborate parades, seeking the perfect activity for the occasion. But one idea stood out as particularly fitting for a man of action: a grand, organized rabbit hunt. A rabbit hunt was decided. It was a classic pastime for European nobility, combining sport with the outdoors. But this couldn't be just any hunt. For an emperor, it had to be on an imperial scale. Berthier was instructed to spare no expense and to ensure an abundance of game for the emperor's party. He sent his men out to procure the rabbits, not a few dozen or even a few hundred. Reports vary, but sources suggest that Berthier arranged for as many as 3,000 rabbits for the event. This is where the plan began to go wrong. Procuring wild rabbits in such numbers was difficult and time-consuming. So, Berthier's men took a shortcut. They sourced the rabbits not from the wild, but from local farmers. These were not fearful wild animals. They were domesticated bunnies, accustomed to humans and expecting food from them. Unaware of this crucial detail, Berthier had thousands of tame rabbits gathered and placed in cages along a large field. The stage was set for a day of imperial sport, but the actors in this drama had a very different script in mind. The day of the hunt arrived. Napoleon and his entourage of high-ranking military officers made their way to the field. The emperor was in high spirits, looking forward to a relaxing day away from the burdens of statecraft. His guests, some of the most powerful men in France, chatted excitedly, ready for the sport to commence. They were armed with hunting implements, expecting the rabbits to scatter in fear, providing a challenging pursuit. Berthier gave the signal, beaming with pride at the spectacle he had arranged for his emperor. On his command, the attendants began opening the doors of the hundreds of cages lining the field. A moment of silence fell over the field as the rabbits were released. The hunters readied themselves for action. The plan was simple. The rabbits would bolt for the cover of the nearby woods, and the chase would begin. But the rabbits did not run away. They paused for a moment, a massive, furry tide about to turn. Instead of fleeing, they turned as one, and they all looked directly at Napoleon and his distinguished guests. There was a moment of confusion. These were not the actions of frightened, wild animals at all. These rabbits associated humans with one thing and one thing only: food, and they were hungry. They saw the most important-looking man in the field, Napoleon himself, and assumed he was their keeper. And so, the fluffy tide began to move. Not away, but directly towards the Emperor of France. At first, it was likely amusing. A few bunnies hopping towards them. The hunting party probably laughed. But then more came. Dozens, then hundreds, all converging on the group with surprising speed. The laughter died down, replaced by looks of bewilderment. This was not part of the plan. The rabbits formed two wings, flanking the party before surging forward in a pincer movement. It was a maneuver any general would recognize, but this fuzzy army wasn't interested in conquest, just carrots. The great military strategist Napoleon Bonaparte was suddenly finding himself outmaneuvered by a horde of bunnies. The situation escalated quickly. The rabbits reached the emperor's party and began to swarm around their feet. Napoleon, a man who commanded armies, tried to shoo them away with his riding crop, but it was useless. For every rabbit he pushed away, 3 more took its place, hopping and nudging insistently. His officers were in a similar state, laughing nervously at first, then becoming genuinely flustered by the furry onslaught. The rabbits were relentless. Some began to bound up Napoleon's legs, seeking the source of the anticipated meal. A tide of fur was rising up the emperor's uniform. The commander of Europe was being completely overwhelmed. His shouts for his men to handle the situation were lost in the chaos of thousands of hungry bunnies. The sheer weight and number of the animals made it difficult for him to even move his legs. This was not a glorious hunt. It was a bizarre, fluffy, and utterly humiliating siege by an army of herbivores. Realizing the absurdity and hopelessness of the situation, Napoleon made a decision he rarely ever made. He retreated. With his dignity in tatters, the emperor turned and made a hasty retreat towards the safety of his imperial carriage. But the rabbits were not done. They saw their food source trying to escape and gave chase. The conqueror of nations was now being pursued across a field by a legion of fluffy, long-eared creatures. His coachmen and attendants, seeing their emperor in distress, could only stare in disbelief at the surreal scene. Napoleon scrambled towards the carriage, the rabbits nipping playfully at his boots and uniform as he went. He finally reached the carriage door and threw himself inside, hoping to find refuge from the furry menace. But the siege wasn't over. The most determined of the rabbits followed him, leaping into the carriage itself. The emperor was forced to throw the persistent bunnies out of the window as the carriage began to move. Even as the carriage sped away, the relentless army of rabbits continued their pursuit for a short distance. The great Napoleon had been routed, not by cannons or cavalry, but by a catastrophic failure in catering. As the imperial carriage disappeared over the horizon, a strange calm fell over the battlefield of bunnies. The rabbits, their primary target gone, milled about in confusion, still looking for their promised meal. Napoleon's officers were left standing in the middle of the field, surrounded by the furry victors. One can only imagine the bewildered expression on the face of Alexandre Berthier, the hunt's organizer. His grand celebration had turned into a complete and utter farce, a moment of supreme embarrassment. The field was littered not with the spoils of a hunt, but with abandoned cages and thousands of wandering bunnies. The attendants who had released the rabbits now had the unenviable task of trying to round them all up again. This event, which was meant to project power and leisure, had instead showcased a bizarre moment of vulnerability. The story was so absurd that it was quickly recorded by memorialist Baron Paul Thibault, ensuring it wouldn't be forgotten. And so, the tale of Napoleon's most unusual defeat entered the annals of history as a comical footnote. So, what was the critical error? It all came down to a simple misunderstanding of biology and behavior. A proper hunt uses wild rabbits. These animals are naturally timid and have a strong flight instinct. When confronted by humans or loud noises, their immediate reaction is to scatter and seek shelter as fast as possible. This is what creates the sport of the hunt, the challenge of pursuing a fast and elusive target. However, Berthier's men had gathered domesticated rabbits, likely from nearby farms, to save time and effort. These rabbits have had their flight instinct bred out of them over generations of living with humans. Instead of seeing humans as a threat, they see them as a source of food, comfort, and safety. So, when released, they didn't see predators to flee from. They saw thousands of waiters bringing dinner. Their charge was not an act of aggression, but an act of extreme, misplaced, and hungry affection. It was a simple yet catastrophic oversight that led to one of history's most comical military retreats. This bizarre incident stands in stark contrast to the rest of Napoleon's storied and formidable military career. This was a man who commanded the Grande Armée, one of the most formidable forces in European history. He achieved legendary victories at places like Austerlitz, demonstrating tactical genius against multiple empires at once. His strategies and doctrines are still studied in military academies around the world to this very day. Later in his career, he would face crushing, historic defeats that would define his downfall. The disastrous Russian campaign of 1812 saw his massive army decimated by the harsh winter and scorched earth tactics. And of course, his final undoing came at the legendary Battle of Waterloo in 1815. These were monumental events that changed the course of world history, involving massive armies and grand strategies. Yet, nestled among these epic tales is the story of the Rabbit of Tilsit, a defeat of a different kind. It serves as a humorous reminder that even the most powerful people can be humbled by the most unexpected of circumstances. So, was Napoleon truly defeated by rabbits? In a military sense, of course not. It was a chaotic retreat, not a battle. But in a battle for dignity and composure, the emperor undoubtedly lost to the fluffy horde that day. The story highlights the folly of overconfidence and the chaos that can ensue from one small, overlooked detail. It's a testament to the fact that no amount of planning can account for the unpredictable forces of nature. Or, in this case, the unpredictable force of 3,000 hungry, domesticated bunnies with no sense of personal space. This tale humanizes a figure often seen as larger than life, a stoic commander on a pedestal. It shows us a rare moment where the great Emperor Napoleon was not in command, but was utterly flustered. The incident was likely a source of immense frustration for Napoleon, but a source of amusement for others. And for us, centuries later, it remains one of the most delightful and surprising anecdotes in all of history. The day a conqueror was conquered, not by an army of men, but by an adorable, fluffy, and very hungry army of bunnies.